Recording.
The grid video, I said.
All right. Well, good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Scottish Rite Minneapolis Valley Thursday Educational Series. We are going to be talking about Masonic connection to, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that word, but
Zoroastrianism.
Thank you.
What's this arrow?
So, as we talked about in previous sessions, these are not tiled meetings, so please govern yourselves accordingly. These are recorded, so you heard me start the recording. So be careful.
They didn't like my video. They didn't like my background.
Be sure you mute yourself as part of this. During the session, if you want to unmute, you can use the space bar. Please send questions via the chat feature at the end. We can open up the mics again for the chats via the voice at the end of the session. There will be a survey sent out via chat. Please be sure to fill that out. It's useful information that we use to improve the presentation process. With that, we have an upcoming list of sessions for going through till March, presented by several different brothers out of the Scottish Rite. Here we have some talks about symbology, Doric culture, the Templar legend. We're going to talk about conspiracies, which is going to be fun, and the Emerald Tablet. With that, I will let the presentation, we'll pass the ball off to Worship Brother Justin Thompson to talk about this evening's topic. So Justin, it is all yours.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Oh, there it is. All right. Welcome, brothers, to another series of Masonic education from the Minneapolis Valley Scottish Rite Education Committee. I am Justin Thompson. I'm a member of that committee, an officer in the Minneapolis Consistory, and a past master and current secretary of Arcana Lodge number 187. I'm going to present tonight about the Masonic connections we see in Zoroastrianism, and then I'm just going to quickly go through our presentations coming up. As you can see, they will be on the first and third Thursdays, starting obviously today and going through the end of March. We've got Dr. Bill in 2 weeks talking about the symbolism of the architecture of Washington, D.C. Our newest member to the Education Committee, Mark Pruitt, will be presenting on Doric culture in the first Thursday of February, followed 2 weeks later by my predecessor here, Brother Matt Cranston, talking about the history of the Templar legend. First Thursday in March, Brother Hans Nice is going to talk about the Leo Taxil hoax, conspiracies and misconceptions of Freemasonry. And then to tie it all off, since his presentation in our last series on Hermeticism was so well received, Brother Tracy is going to take a dive into the Emerald Tablet, keeping with the theme of Hermeticism here. If you didn't catch his presentation or any of the presentations from our last series, here is the web address to go to, but it's also the link you use to register for this presentation. And if all of that evades you, just do a Google search of Minneapolis Scottish Rite webinars, and this should be the first thing that pops up. While you're there, check out Jason Lang's excellent webpage he redesigned for the Valley. It is quite good. And with that, we will get into Zoroastrianism. I guess, well, briefly, just a quick aside, we're going to talk about religions in both this presentation and the series coming up. We're going to make some comparisons, and we're we don't want this to be considered any sort of endorsement of any religion, but here at the Scottish Rite, we do a lot of delving into different belief systems. So if you hear something that you maybe don't agree with or think is wrong, just kind of look at it objectively. This isn't me or any of us making any sort of a claim to any one religion over another. So Zoroastrianism came from the prophet Zoroaster. Sorry, I got to move some things around here. You may know him better by his Persian name of Zarathustra, Zoroaster being the Greek pronunciation of his name. He was a religious leader from ancient Persia, which is now modern Iran. There is no consensus on when exactly he lived, though Zoroastrian tradition dates him about 600 BC. Some archaeologists believe that there's evidence suggesting that he may have been older than that, may have come from earlier in history than that. Why they disagree with Zoroastrian tradition is a little odd, but they are the scientists, right? And he, Zoroaster, became the prophet when he received word directly through archangels from God. Zoroastrianism, obviously, it is the religion of the prophet Zoroaster. That's a pretty obvious one. It was the official religion of the Persian Empire from 600 BC to 700 Common Age. At the time of Christ, it was equal in popularity to Judaism and was also the dominant religion in the region for quite some time. However, since then, it has dropped dramatically, which is something we as Masons can, I'm sure, sympathize with. There are less than 200,000 current practitioners. The largest group of these is the Parsis in India. They migrated to India from the Persian Empire in right around the 7th century as Islam started to become the dominant religion in the area. There's also a group of Iranian Zoroastrians still practicing, as well as small pockets that we still see here in North America. It is one of the oldest continually practiced belief systems. The way it's set up, there hasn't been a whole lot of modernization from its original inception. And it is also considered one of the first monotheistic religions, which we will kind of dive into a little more here. Their book is the Avesta, sometimes called the Zendavesta. These are the holy teachings of Zoroaster. They were transmitted orally until written down during the Third Iranian Empire by the Sasanians. The Avesta is broken into 5 sections. The principal of these is the Yasna, which is a group of hymns called the Gathas, and this is the only section of the Avesta that was written by Zoroaster himself, which is why it is kind of the primary section of the Avesta. There's also the Visprat, which pays homage to Zoroastrian spiritual leaders. The Venedad, which is a collection of civil and spiritual law for Zoroastrians to follow. The Yash, which are 21 mythical hymns dedicated to angels and heroes in the Zoroastrian tradition. And lastly, the Kurta Avesta, which are minor texts, prayers for specific events and occasions. So as I said, the book is actually called the Avesta, though sometimes called the Zend-Avesta, which means the interpretation of the Avesta. Interpretation because the other 4 sections are kind of built around the Gathas that were written by Zoroaster himself. And while there were many copies of the Avesta made, the original manuscripts were destroyed by Alexander the Great in his invasion of the Persian Empire in 334 BC. That campaign lasted about a decade. The core beliefs, the major tenets of Zoroastrianism. So we covered some of the what's of Zoroastrianism, and we're going to keep going. But when we get to these Masonic connections, this not being a tiled meeting, and us having some entered apprentices here, we will have to speak codedly about some of these connections or hint at them. So we won't necessarily spell out every connection we see, but we will kind of focus in on them as we cover. So again, being one of the first monotheistic religions, they believe in one God, who they call Ahura Mazda, which means wise Lord. In the Gathas, you'll see Zoroaster refer to him as Ahura, sometimes as Mazda, as Ahura Mazda. So they're all used kind of interchangeably. We see the concept of duality, this struggle between good and evil, obviously a major part of Freemasonry as well, where they believe in that Ahura Mazda, representing good, is in a struggle with Angra Mainyu, which is similar to what a lot of the Abrahamic religions would consider the devil. But of course, he's not equal to Angra Mainyu. I'm sorry, to Ahura Mazda, who is the one God. They believe in a savior born of a virgin, or more specifically, a series of 3 saviors. It's not entirely clear whether all 3 of the saviors come at the same time, or if they are all born of a virgin. But the final savior in the series of 3 is the one who will ultimately decide this conflict between good and evil. Thank you. Go. Another core belief of Zoroastrianism is that charity keeps you aligned with cosmic order, good cosmic order, which they call Asha. This obviously should be very familiar to any Masons who, from the first degree on. Charity is a core tenet of Freemasonry as well, talked about quite at length and hopefully practiced as well. Not only do they believe in a good cosmic order of Asha, but they believe in a bad cosmic or disorder, which they consider lies. Lying is a very great sin in Zoroastrian tradition. The historical record, when met by different cultures, always paints the Zoroastrians as being very honest, very plain dealing in their dealings, which obviously, again, is something we see coming up in Masonry quite extensively as well. The threefold path of Asha is perhaps, their most well-known tenet of Zoroastrianism. Now, it's not a very well-known religion, so that take that with a grain of salt, but popularity on a sliding scale. This threefold path of Asha is good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. You think good thoughts that lead to giving good words that lead to performing good deeds. And through that, again, you're keeping with the good cosmic order. And we'll delve a little more into that a little later when we talk more about the duality. And then again, this idea of doing good without the hope of reward, the idea of doing good for goodness sake. Again, a major tenet of Freemasonry that we see, the idea of trying to make things better, doing good not for personal gain, but for the idea of creating a better world for all. Ahura Mazda is the one god of the Zoroastrian tradition. Again, it means wise lord. They believe that Ahura Mazda predates creation. So before anything was created, Ahura Mazda was there. And then he came out, he began creation, and through the first light. So here we see goodness being associated with light. There's a lot of fire symbolism in Zoroastrian tradition, so much that a lot of historical record paints them as fire worshippers, although that is not correct. Much like in Freemasonry, light, fire is used as a symbol for these higher ideas. Whoa. And they also believe that all goodness comes from Ahura Mazda, that Ahura Mazda is goodness. And through this belief, they discourage things, Zoroastrians, discourage things such as fasting, as sacrifices. They believe, well, while they don't want you to overindulge, they do believe that Ahura Mazda, being of goodness, wants you to be happy, and to deprive yourself of good things is against the will of Ahura Mazda. So, as one of the oldest monotheistic religions, we start to see Zoroastrianism as a bridge from the polytheistic religions of the East, Hinduism and Buddhism, and we start to move into the more modern religions, the Abrahamic religions, developing in the Arabian Peninsula, as well as also the monotheistic religions of Greece, based on where the Persian Empire is. It's kind of at this meeting point of India to the east. You've got Greece to the west. And you start to see these things kind of develop as history goes by. As we stated before, they were kind of competing with Judaism as far as popularity is concerned. They were the official religion of the Persian Empire, which started to decrease in popularity as Islam rose. But you're also seeing a lot of influence on these religions. You probably already noticed the whole Savior born of a virgin thing. That we see in Christianity, of course. We see different things in the esoteric systems that we will touch on in a little bit as well. And this whole theme of moving from polytheism to monotheism is also kind of a central theme of some of the later degrees of the Scottish Rite, specifically in the Council of Kadosh, where you're moving from the polytheistic lesser mysteries to a more inclusive monotheistic beliefs in the greater mysteries. Duality. So As we talked about, we see the struggle between good and evil, good often represented as light, evil represented as darkness. And again, we're seeing the modernization of kind of Eastern philosophy moving into a more Western version of duality. And what I mean by that is in the East, in Hinduism and Buddhism, we see this cosmological duality where good and evil are battling on a scale kind of above our human realm. Eastern philosophies separate consciousness more from the ideas of matter, which including both the mind and body. But in Zoroastrianism, we start to see the consciousness, the human consciousness, added to the struggle, in that Zoroastrians believe that through these good thoughts and good words and good deeds, humans are able to influence, to help tip the balance of the struggle towards good in a way that we don't necessarily see in the Eastern philosophies. So here we have a depiction of Ahura Mazda battling the devil type figure, Angra Mainyu, and this should be familiar to us as Freemasons. Chances are you look at it every time you go to lodge. This should be something that sparks a similar feeling to you, right? The Amesha Spenta. This here we see the 7 immortal beings that come from Ahura Mazda. They derive from Ahura Mazda. They're one god, and through these immortal beings, Ahura Mazda is able to do his work. There are 7 beings, 4 male and 3 female, which should be familiar to anyone who has been through the degrees of the consistory. These immortals, these beings, are also used to personify aspirational qualities that we as humans should be moving towards. So Spenta Mainyu that you see here in the purple is considered the first created of these immortals, and through him Ahura Mazda created humanity. Asha Vahishta you see representing truth and justice. Vohumana represents righteous thinking. Spenta Armaiti representing devotion. Haravatat, wholeness. Amaratat, immortality. And finally, Kshatra Vaira, representing righteous power. And it's interesting because of where Zoroastrian tradition kind of comes from. You see this mixing, or this kind of almost a common link between the esoteric systems of the East and the esoteric systems of the West. So we're going to move to a next slide, but remember that we've got 7 color-coded immortals here, and that they are 4 male and 3 female. We see the chakras of the East on the left side of the screen here, and you see the Kabbalistic tree of life on the right. So you've got 7 chakras, and you've got 7 immortal beings, both representing not exactly the same, but similar personalities, similar attributes. You also see on the right this Kabbalistic tree of life, but there are 10. Well, you need to remember that the top 3 Sephirot in this grouping usually are considered the 3 and 1, 1 and 3, with these 7 lower Sephirot representing more earthly, obtainable qualities. And going back to the 4 male and 3 female of the Amesha Spenta might remind you of your 2nd degree and the introduction of the Greek ideas of the trivium and the quadrivium. Obviously, we have some entered apprentices here, so we won't go much more into that, but that should kind of be sparking some connections in these different esoteric systems. Which came first is not something we're going to necessarily plug into here either, but just kind of keep that in mind. And finally here, what really set this whole presentation off for me is the idea, the holy garb of the Zoroastrians, the Sudra and the Kushti. On the left, you have the Sudra, which is the traditional undergarment of a Zoroastrian. Based on the folding pattern here at the bottom, you see is either male or female, depending on which side the small vertical seam is. So there's some geometry we want to point out here, and that we may be reaching a little bit, but you see that there's a downward equilateral triangle, which makes up where one puts their head through. Now, you should know, as a Scottish Rite Mason especially, the equilateral triangle pointing up, representing God, the divine, the Holy Trinity, what have you. But the equilateral triangle pointing down, at least in some conceptions of the Seal of Solomon or Star of David, you see representing the perfect man. And in Zoroastrian tradition, that would be this kind of trinity of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And as it points downward into this small square pocket known as the Garaban, you may also remember that the square, among many Masonic symbols, is also symbolic of the material plane. So we see these this trinity of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds pointing into this square material plane pocket where Zoroastrians believe they keep their good deeds to charge this undergarment with spiritual protection, spiritual shield that they wear at all times. In public, at least, it is under their clothes, or should be. Now, that geometry may be a stretch, but it's certainly something interesting to think about. And like I said, what brought me to originally do this presentation was a couple of years ago, I saw a presentation of a Zoroastrian gentleman, and he talked about the Kushti. Kushti is a rope girdle tied around the waist 3 times. That should definitely be familiar to any Master Mason. There are 72 strands of the Kushti, which represent the 72 chapters of the Yasna, which were, again, the principal section of the Avesta, the Zoroastrian holy book, written by Zarathustra himself, and the 24 threaded tassels on the end representing the 24 hours of the day. So we covered a lot of symbolism here, a lot of Zoroastrian beliefs. The point of this presentation is not necessarily to go back and trace a common ancestor. I think, honestly, trying to find much information on Zoroastrianism itself served to be more challenging than I had expected. So do we know if there is a direct Masonic connection to Zoroastrianism? Well, that's up for you to decide, but it is certainly true that Albert Pike, in his development of the degrees of the Scottish Rite, definitely was heavily influenced by Zoroaster. Zarathustra comes up in numerous chapters of Morals and Dogma, and is definitely compared to more often than not, as well as different religions of the East and such. And with that, I hope you know a little bit more about Zoroastrianism and how to pronounce it than you did when we started.
Well, thank you, Brother Justin. Do we have any questions after the presentation there? I don't have any in the chat, but please unmute yourself and ask away.
Very well done, Justin. Very insightful. I really enjoyed it. Now, here's a question for you. There's apparently a heavy metal rock band that you used to listen to by the same name. So could you shed some light on that?
I suppose I could. Yeah, I don't know how much more light I could shed on it, but there used to be a local hardcore band called Songs of Zarathustra, which was certainly my first introduction to the prophet. And so when I went through the degrees of the Scottish Rite, it definitely perked my interest to hear this name again in the degrees, and got me kind of thinking and looking into who this person actually was, rather than just a band that would be screaming very loudly.
If I may, on the topic of bands, most of us probably already know Zoroastrian. He's no longer with us. It's Freddie Mercury of Queen. His family is Zoroastrian. Matter of fact, if you've watched the recent, it's probably a few years old now, movie about Freddie Mercury and Queen. I can't remember the name of the title. In the beginning, Freddie's talking with his family and his father specifically, and you hear his father say good thoughts, good words, good deeds in there. And at the end of the movie, Freddie kind of reconnects with his father because they went a little bit estranged, and says, "See, Dad, good deeds." So kind of you don't really call it out as Zoroastrian through the movie, but once you know about it, it is obvious, right? So thank you, Justin.
The name of the movie was Bohemian Rhapsody, and
Thank
that
you.
was the movie that had the square and compass ring at the very end, the very beginning of the movie. The first scene was the roadie pushing a thing, and it was big giant square and compass on his ring.
Yeah, the connections are everywhere. Yeah,
Yep.
Freddie Mercury was a Parsi, as I believe that's correct, which is the largest diaspora of Zoroastrians that were found in India. Well, originally moved from Persia to India, but they've since moved on as well.
Yeah, his family was from Iran, so you're correct there. Yep.
Wow.
Well, as an aside, the 15th and 16th degree of the Scottish Rite kind of deals with this subject. I was trying to find the name of the prophet, but Zoroastrianism originally was a pretty dualistic religion, kind of going back farther to the Tao of yin and yang, good and evil. And on the return, when the Israelites were returning from the Babylonian captivity, they had been exposed very heavily to this Zoroastrian belief. And I can't remember the name of the prophet, but he's speaking for God said, what you see as good and evil is me. There is no dualism. There's only one God, which is me. And if you think it's good or you think it's bad, it's all for me. And that was trying to get the people away from the dualism of the Zoroastrian philosophy.
Eddie, isn't that the prophet Haggai?
I don't know. I was trying to look in the my Masonic Bible while we were doing this, but I can't remember. It could have been also Ezra. I don't know, but it was very illuminating that after the Israelites were not an educated people before the captivity. They were basically farmers. You know, they either had wine or sheep or grapes or olives. And when they went to Babylonia, which was the cultural center of the universe, I think at that time, they became very educated and achieved some type of status. And again, on the way back, the concept of this dualism kept coming up. And so this prophet had to shut it down by saying, there is no dualism. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's good or evil, it's all me. So I think that has a lot to do with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other questions?
Lovely.
Just have
Well
a
done.
quick question. In a lot of religions, the dualism actually refers to life and death. Is that also true in Zoroastrianism?
Not, I can't speak on that too much because I didn't see anything basing, darkness and death together. Zoroastrians have kind of a pretty open version of death. They have some interesting death rituals even. Oftentimes the body is taken out into nature to be picked apart by the buzzards, and then there's fire for the bones. But it's not necessarily considered an evil or dark. Death is not necessarily considered the darkness from what I have seen, but that was not a subject I found a whole lot of information about.
Very nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. If there aren't any
Very nice. Thank you, Jeff.
any other questions, thank you, brothers, for joining. I will. I need to post the. Hold on. I'll stop the share, and I need to get you guys the link for
Survey.
their survey.